Hello again, Mr. Richens here with a Science Skills series video, this time on the Lab Notebook. You have purchased a Science Lab Notebook for courses in physics, chemistry, and biology, and this is for you to record all your experiments, the data you collect, and your analysis of that data. And it needs to be done properly. There are specific sections which need to be included in each laboratory record, and you will be graded on the presence of those sections, plus the legibility and the organization of your information. So I just wanted to run through some quick tips for you. All right, header information needs to be filled out. There's a couple things that you can skip. You can skip the locker desk information, and if you want to, you can write the course in here. There's no section number, obviously, but you could write the course in there. Experiment number, if it's given to you, write it down, so that's optional. But you should always have the experiment, the title of the experiment, the date on which the experiment is conducted, your name, and your lab partner's name. Those are musts. Failure to completely fill out the header will cost you points. The sections that need to be completed in the laboratory record are an introduction. That should be 1 or 2 sentences describing what it is that you're accomplishing in the laboratory. Are you determining the density of a substance? Are you trying to determine the specific heat capacity? Are you trying to make a certain amount of stuff? Are you observing cells under the microscope in order to see their structure? Each laboratory handout that I give you will have an introductory section. Take that section, narrow it down to 1 or 2 sentences that describe specifically what you're doing in lab, and that's what you need to put in your lab notebook. And so you would put in a section titled Introduction, and under that you would write your 1 or 2 sentences. Now the page is divided by a vertical rule, and so you can either work down one column and then come back to the top and work down the other column. If you prefer to work across, that's fine. I think that working one column at a time actually works a little bit better, particularly for the introduction. Following the introduction, you'll probably have pre-lab questions. Those need to be answered in the laboratory notebook, and they should be placed before any other materials. Make sure that it's clear that these are your pre-lab questions and you've got, or the answers to your pre-lab questions. It would be to your advantage to write out the question, the pre-lab question, and then your answer after it. Of course, always do it in pen, and it needs to be blue or black ink, not any exotic colors. After the pre-lab questions, you want to go on to your materials. And after that, your procedure. You can copy the procedure verbatim from the laboratory handout that I give you, or you can summarize that. You need to be careful with summarizing, though. You want the directions to be clear so that you can follow them. Ideally, you should be following the procedures that you've written here in your lab notebook, not off the lab sheet itself, because this is what you'll have to refer back to. You may lose the lab handout at some point, but you should have this. All of these 4 sections should always be filled out before you enter lab. The next thing that you would have is your data section. Typically, we want to organize our data in tables whenever possible so that it's clearly understood. Typically, you can have a data table that's a couple of rows and a couple of columns. The lines on the graph paper are particularly nice for that. Across the top, you may have several different things that you're measuring, and so let's say that we're going to measure the width, and we're going to do it in centimeters, and then we're going to measure the length, and we're going to do that in centimeters also. Remember that measurements always have to have units associated with them. If you put the units at the top of the column, it's assumed that those units apply to all measurements in the column. Same here. If you don't put the measurements at the top of the column, they would need to be included in each data cell. Now let's say we're going to do several different objects. So we're going to do object A, object B, object C, and object D. All right, and we'll go ahead and draw our line straight across like that. And I'm just doing this freehand. A straight edge would probably make it go a little bit better. And this is where you would record your information. I'm going to be looking for your data table, or I'm going to be looking for your data. It's easiest to find if it's in a data table. This is not the place to do any type of analysis of your data. All analysis will be done in the analysis section later in the lab. Chemistry experiments will often have you make observations as you're going through the procedure. And so it would be nice to have the observations here next to the procedure step that generated those observations. Later you can analyze that in the analysis section. After the data and after it's collected, we'll have our analysis. This is where we'll do statistical analysis of the information. You should include an example calculation if any is done. So for instance, since we've collected width and length, perhaps we're trying to calculate the area of this object. So we'd want to show an example calculation. So we would say that the area is equal to the width times the length. And then we take one sample of data, perhaps A, plug it in here, and then calculate it. And then for the other ones, we could do an analysis table. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to say analysis continued. And I am going to generate a table for my analysis. Like that. And I will put the area up here, and we'll calculate the area in square centimeters for this particular case. And there is that, and so we can put A, B, C, D. And then maybe we'll take an average. So we can leave a space there for the average. Sometimes statistical analysis will be done on the information that you generate, and so you may need to incorporate lines for averages, perhaps medians, maybe a standard deviation, things like that. If we're working in chemistry or biology, and also maybe some of the physics, we may be also using some statistical software to analyze our data, and we'll be generating correlation factors or standard deviations and variances. So those would be things to note in your lab also. If your lab produces sheets from the printer, like you're going to print out your data is collected automatically using a lab computer, and that's printed out. You can put those printouts here in your lab notebook. Typically what they would do is actually tape it in or affix it to the lab page, but I'll have you copy it from the printout into here and have you save the original printout. Finally, the last section that you'll need to do will be discussion and post-lab questions. Sometimes you'll be asked to determine specific things, and you'll want to give the value that you determined in the discussion. Also, you'll want to discuss what kind of errors may have affected the final value that you got. Post-lab questions will be outlined in the lab handout. Once again, like the pre-lab questions, I would suggest writing out the question and then writing out the answer following that, so that you have a complete record of what you've done. At the very end of the lab, you should get your partner's signature, your signature here, the date, and your partner signature. If you didn't work as partners, you can have I can sign this, or someone that you were working beside can sign it for you. But you need to have both signatures and both dated. Now, one of the things that I didn't mention was that occasionally labs will run over to other days, and so it's appropriate to notate the fact that it has gone over to another day by entering a interim date here. So we've put the date at the top of the page, but now let's say we carry over to a second day, we might make a note in the lab record, continued on 9/12/2017. And everything below this would be observations that were made on September 12th. Remember, organization, legibility, and having all the sections is going to be important to getting the best grade on your lab reports.